Oh, he's in a jacket. Must be a music theory vid. So, people who are only here for the video games or music reviews, you can probably skip this one. People who are interested in nerdy music theory stuff, this video's for you. Let's talk about sonata form.
Bloop boop boo. Bloop doop doo. Bloop doop da.
Hey, I'm Michael. I have a doctorate in music composition, and I taught music theory courses as an adjunct professor for 6 years, and I really miss it. My most recent new character composition, linked in the comments, this one was inspired by Tia from Lufia 2 Rise of the Sinistrals. It was written in a loose sonata form. I talked about that in the stream where I started working on the piece, also linked in the comments. And I figured this would be a good case for a music theory class video. So, sonata form. It's something that pretty much every music major needs to learn at some point, but it's also something that many musicians don't use in their careers. Let's break this down into parts. First, form. And form is how you organize different sections of a piece of music. And it also typically describes how the different sections relate to each other with things like key relationships. Sonata form was a really common form in the classical and romantic periods. It was typically the first movement of a symphony, or as the name suggests, a sonata or a concerto, a string quartet. Many pieces, first movements were often in sonata form. It grew out of this thing called rounded binary form. Backing up, binary form is what its name suggests, a form with two parts. We typically label sections of music with capital letters unless there's a better, more descriptive term to use. So in binary form, we have an A section and a contrasting B section. In rounded binary form, the A section returns, so it's ABA, which we would on its own call ternary form, but that's another thing. But anyway, in rounded binary form, the A section returns, but it's slightly different. Importantly, this second A form, which we call A prime, ends in the same key that the beginning of the piece starts in. Sonata form is kind of an expanded, rounded binary form with a lot more specific details to it. As I mentioned earlier, the letter names are replaced with more descriptive terms. A becomes the exposition, B becomes development, and A prime becomes the recapitulation. The exposition is typically repeated with repeat signs. The development and recapitulation were traditionally also written with repeat signs, giving the whole thing actually like two parts. The exposition that's repeated, and the development and the recapitulation that's repeated. But modern performances almost never take the repeats on these second parts. Later in history, all of the repeats disappear and each section gets longer to make up for the lack of repeats. The exposition has these specific things in it. There's sometimes an introduction, which also later in history expands. There's the first theme, which every piece in sonata form has a first theme, and the key of this theme is important. This is our home key, this is home base, and we will end the entire piece in this key as well. There's a transition between the first key and the second key. This transition is important, and we change keys somewhere in it. The second theme is the other thing that sonata form needs. The transition takes us into this second key, and there are typical things that second keys tend to be in relation to the first key, but that's not important for now. We will end the exposition in this second key. There may be a closing section. Sometimes this is its own full-fledged theme, but other times it's just a cadence, or often a repeated cadence of 5-1, 5-1, 5-1 in this second key to really signal the finality of this section. But as I said before, earlier in history, this entire exposition would be repeated. Later, not. Then we move on to what was the B section, but for the purposes of sonata form is called the development section. This section can really be basically anything. It's often based on one or more short ideas from the exposition, and that idea might come from the first theme, or the second theme, or the transition, or the intro, or the closing idea. It can come from anywhere, and it can be a full idea or just a snippet of an idea. But sometimes it doesn't do that at all. Sometimes it's entirely new material. The development can be in any key, and it often moves between several keys. This section in particular is heavily expanded in the Romantic era. This is where all of the drama and emotion comes in. The development section ends with a re-transition. So it's called this because it's like the transition in the exposition, but the transition goes from the home key to the new key area, the second theme's key area. In the retransition, we go from wherever we left off. It could be any key, and we are going back home to the home key of theme 1. So it's a retransition. We're going back. Then what used to be called the A prime section, now called the recapitulation, or often a recap for short. It is a recap of the exposition. We do it again. Usually has most of the same parts in the same order. It might not have the intro or something like that, but it definitely will have theme 1 in the home key that theme 1 was in the first time, and which the retransition took us to, the home key for theme 1. But then the transition to the second theme is rewritten so that it does not change key. The second theme is in the same key as the first theme in the recap. And that's another piece of drama. There's this competition between these two key areas, which is resolved in the recap where they're in the same key. Sometimes, again, there's additional closing material or a coda. This could repeat ideas. It could even have some new ideas. And later in history, this coda sort of becomes a second development, but it will end with a really solid cadence in our home key. Hey, so do you find this content interesting? Let me know. Leave a comment, leave a like, subscribe. If you are looking for a channel that does only this, I will let you know ahead of time that this is sort of not the norm. This is an exception. On this channel, we mostly talk about media and review media, and that's especially music and video games. But when I talk about a concept in another video, I often want to describe that concept. So I mentioned sonata form when I was working on Tia's sonata. So I thought, hey, let's make sure that everyone knows what sonata form is if they're interested. So follow if you're interested in other things, but if you're only looking for specific content, check out our playlists. We've got a playlist for music. We got a playlist for video games. We also have a playlist for these music theory classes. So I've got a few other ones that you might be interested in. Check them out. Anyway, back to the video. Okay, so to test this, I recommend that you pause the video and find a recording of Beethoven's Fifth Symphony to listen to, and see if you can pick out the sections of the form just by listening. Don't find a YouTube video that has the score to follow along with as well. I think it's a useful exercise to do it with just your ears. This isn't the absolute cleanest example of sonata form, but I think it's good to listen to something that you're already likely familiar with. As you listen, try to listen for the transition in the exposition leading to the second key. Try to listen for the second theme in a new key. Listen for the repeat of the entire exposition. Listen for the wildly shifting key centers during the development. Listen for the retransition if you can, but this can be hard to hear in many sonata forms. Listen for the beginning of the recap, which is usually easy to hear, but some composers try to trick you, but Beethoven does not try to trick you in this example. Listen for the transition to the second theme, which is actually a little tricky in this example. And listen for the second theme, but Beethoven plays with the form here. See if you can figure out how when you listen. And listen to see if there's a coda or any closing material. So go ahead and pause this video now and open up a new tab, look up a recording of just the first movement of Beethoven's Fifth Symphony. All right, welcome back. How did you do? Could you hear the different sections? Could you hear what Beethoven did differently from the norm? Let's take a look at the score together. If you can't read music, feel free to skip ahead to this time here on the screen. If you are sticking around for this part, I've included a link to the score from IMSLP, one of the best websites for classical musicians, so you can study the score a little bit more later if you want. All of the instruments are written in Italian, so just so you know what's going on here. Flauti, flutes, oboe, oboes, clarinetti in B. That means clarinets that are in B flat. So you'll notice they have a different key signature. That's because they are transposing instruments. Fagotti are the bassoons. Corny, that's horns, that's French horn. In S, that's E flat. So again, this is in a different key signature. It's another transposing instrument. It's harder to follow these. Tromba in C, so this is a C instrument, and S, that's the sort of the trumpets. I can't remember which. It's been a minute. And we got timpani, which are the same in English. Violins, second violins, violas, cellos, and basses. So when you're looking at something that you suspect to be in sonata form, what you should do is first take a look, see if you can find the repeat signs. So scrolling through, got to see that there are two different staffs here. So if you're following along with this, it's often best to follow along with the violin part. You go here through this, and then you go here to this line if you're not used to following full scores. But we're looking for a repeat sign, and there is one right here. So after this repeat sign is where the development starts. Now, the other thing we want to look for is where do we think the second theme starts? The first theme is in C minor. So with three flats, it's best to just focus on the strings if you are not as used to reading full score. But focusing on the melody is mostly going to be in the violins in a lot of symphonies anyway. This is a pretty obvious C minor melody starting on G. So, me, fa, re. This C that we hear in the cellos is our tonic pitch, also in the bassoons up here. What is the key of the second theme, and where do we think that starts? I'm wondering if while you were listening, you could pick it up, but it is here. The horns started off but they're transposing instruments. So let's not pay attention to those right now. Instead, let's look at the violins. The first violins looking here and at the bottom here. That's the second theme. And that is in E flat major. That is a really common key relationship between the two keys when the first theme is in a minor key. C minor has three flats. E flat major also has three flats. It's the relative major. That's a really common key relationship when you're in a minor key between theme one and theme two. So where does the transition start then? We're going to look for a big cadence in C minor. And it is right here. We've got a big half cadence here. That's the end of this theme. And everything after that is transition. So the transition can be a little bit hard to follow exactly what key center we're in, but it eventually leads us to E flat major or the mediant, if you know those terms, for the second theme. And we continue with the second theme in E flat major to a big 5-1 cadence in E flat major. That's the end of the exposition. We're not going to really focus on the development, but it focuses on the ba 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 rhythm and this descending by third most of the time, but it's the rhythm that's actually more important in this development. Beethoven's really playing with this idea, and we've got these little figures that lead us to a new key area where we play with the idea a little bit more. So now we want to look for where does the recapitulation start. A good thing to do to make it easier is to keep in mind what the beginning looks like. We want so, me, fa, re, or G, E flat, F, D. So going back through here, skimming through, looking for those pitches in the violins because they're most likely going to have the melody again. So like here, it's like almost hinting that we're there, but we're in the wrong key. And here we are. It's an octave higher, but it's there. So this is where the recap starts. So now we want to look for theme two in the recap. So remember before that was in E flat major, it was sol, do, ti, do, re, la, la, sol. We're looking for that. And we're going to see if maybe the horn leads us there again. It might or it might not. Here's the horn. And we've got here, that's in C major. That's the interesting thing that Beethoven does. Normally, this would be in C minor. The horn introducing it here is where theme two starts. So let's look at this transition. If you were really analyzing this, you would print out these and put the transition from the exposition next to the transition in the recapitulation and go measure by measure and see how they're different. That's sort of where the meat of this is. It's sort of like a cool puzzle. Like, how did Beethoven twist this idea to make it fit? Because normally there's a pretty close measure by measure relation between the transition in each of these two areas. I think the most interesting thing that is easy to hear is this little oboe solo that happens right here at the beginning of the transition. It's a nice little moment. Okay, so Beethoven has now gotten us to C major, but that's not technically our home key. And I think that is why, instead of having a big final cadence in C major, Beethoven continues to twist it and turn it and bring this idea back and have it be pretty insistent until we finally end up back in C minor. It continues. This closing theme is pretty long in this case, but then we end looking at the violins here again in C minor. So that brings it all home again. So now that we've looked through the Beethoven, I want to show you my score for Tia's Sonata so that we can look and listen through together because I own the rights to this one. And I want to cut in here and say that I'm not saying that I'm as good as Beethoven or anything like that. I only want to look at this theme because it's something that I have the rights to, and we can play the music and listen along and follow the score along with it at the same time without any rights problems. And yeah, it would be a rights issue to do the same thing with the Beethoven Symphony. The music itself is in the public domain, but any recording that I would find that we could listen to together would not be in the public domain. That recording was made by people more recently, so it's still under copyright. Anyway, back to my music now. All right, so first we're just going to look through and find all the spots that I told you should look for. Look for the repeats. Now here's an open repeat. That doesn't really tell us much yet. It hints at something though. So let's look ahead. Here's the close of the repeat. So the development starts where this number 2 is, or at letter F. If we go back then, that suggests that the exposition or theme 1 really starts here, or actually, it's at this A, I'll tell you this. So these first 4 bars here are actually introduction. So listen for this introduction, then this theme 1 starting here. This is a little bit sloppy because this isn't not a completely optimized score for looking at. This is really just so that I could follow the notes along when I was playing all of these into Logic to make this sounds. But we've got a key change here at letter B. This is where my form is a little bit different. This is actually the transition. The key change happens right at the beginning of the transition. Normally it happens somewhere in the middle or close to the end. But this letter C is a really obvious second theme, I think. So this is written in F, but it's mostly atonal. This written in D flat major is also largely atonal, but then when we get to C, this is a really obvious D flat major melody that you'll hear. This at letter D is a repeat of that melody with the woodwinds added on top. This development is based on theme 1 mostly, but also based on this 3-note idea that pops up here and there. Here we end back in F major, but it's not quite tonal. This is where the recapitulation starts. Here's that transition that before modulated to D flat at the start, but it doesn't modulate at all. So we end with theme 2 in F major instead of D flat major. So now let's listen through this together, and I will point out things as they happen, starting with the intro. Theme 1. transition back to the home key. Transition again. Theme 2 repeated. Transition. Instead of having a big final cadence, I added this transitional material instead. Now we're in the development. It's based on theme 1. But it's got the strings and the winds competing with this 3-note knocking thing going back and forth. Retransition using the same method, chromatic thirds, which I talked about, chromatic immediate, I mean, which we talked about in a previous video, link in the description for that. We're back at theme 1 in the recap now. Transition. Theme 2 in the home key of F, so it's higher. Repeat of theme 2, but this time I also pushed all the strings higher. With just a very simple cadence to finish it off, no real closing material. Thanks so much everybody for joining. Again, please give this video a like if you liked it. Why not check out this other video that YouTube thinks you might like? And up here, there is a playlist of other music theory stuff. Check both of those out, subscribe, and that's about it. Maintain your groovy selves.
How about